The Joe Rogan Experience.
It's going to wipe out who knows how many different species. I mean, it's going to kill everything. And even the people that are left over, what are you left with? Whatever 2 billion people that still survive, where and what? What do you have left? What is the environment like? Like, how polluted is everything? What kind of mutations are going to come from their offspring?
I get into that in the end of the book. So I write the book in essentially 3 acts, like the first 24 minutes, the next 24 minutes, the last 24 minutes, and then nuclear winter. So nuclear winter is very well described by a fellow called Professor Brian Toon, who I interview in the book. He was one of the original 5 authors of, do you remember the nuclear winter theory of our sort of high school years?
Yes.
Right? So that was, Carl Sagan was the lead author on the paper. Toon was the young student. And he's dedicated decades to looking at nuclear winter now. Originally, it was very paw-pawed by the Defense Department. It was said, this is Soviet propaganda. This is never going to happen. And the computer systems and climate modeling have changed to the degree where we can see not only is nuclear winter what was thought in the 80s, it's actually much worse. So whereby originally they thought there would be a year of ice sheets across large bodies of water from Iowa to Ukraine, across the mid-latitudes of the globe. Now that could be up to 7 or 10 years. So think about that much frozen land for that long. You have the death of agriculture. You have like you are talking about. You have the complete disruption of the ability for people to grow food and eat food. And so man reverts to his hunter-gatherer state. And this is all...
But hunting and gathering what? That's
well,
the
exactly.
real problem.
Well, exactly. And also you have, man has to go underground. I take you through what this is like in detail because it's so bizarre to think about that you have a man-made problem, nuclear weapons, and yet people are not paying attention to the fact that whatever is created by man essentially would theoretically have a man-made solution. Like there is a solution to the nuclear weapons threat. It's not, although the results of a nuclear war would be very much like an asteroid striking the United States or the world anywhere. There's a solution to nuclear war. There's a solution called disarmament. We have a total of 12,200 and some odd nuclear weapons.
And is the concern that if we did that, other countries would not do that? We would be defenseless?
Yeah, absolutely. But, things happen in sort of inches and feet. They don't have to happen overnight. Once upon a time, there were 70,000 nuclear warheads in 1986.
Oh, so we're making progress.
We were making progress until this past year. And these treaties are all, at risk, and people are just very busy seeing everybody else as the enemy.
This past year specifically because of what?
Well, Putin's saying he's not going to be involved in the treaty anymore. Donald Trump said pulled us out of the treaty. So there's leaders are threatening. This is all on the table right now. It could and should be looked at. But do you remember back when we were in high school when Reagan and Gorbachev got together for the Reykjavik summit?
Yes.
Do you remember that?
Yes.
That was the beginning of a movement toward disarmament. That was the beginning of this idea of, wait a minute, 70,000 nuclear weapons is just an accident waiting to happen. And so we are at 12,500 today because of that.
And we should also say that there have been some very close calls.
The Secretary General said last year or something, we are one misunderstanding, one miscommunication away from nuclear annihilation. He's not kidding.
There was this one incident where the Soviet Union thought that we were attacking them, and there was one guy who resisted launching a counterstrike, and that one guy prevented nuclear annihilation. One guy said, I think this is an error. This doesn't make sense. I'm not doing this. And that one guy saved us. I don't remember what the incident was. Like, what do you remember?
Yeah.
What was the exact issue?
So his name was Petrov, and it was in 1983. So what's even more remarkable about him is this was at a time of, absolute animosity, enmity between the two nations. It was a really precarious time in the world. And Petrov was in a early warning radar system, like outside of Moscow, that reads data of possible incoming nuclear missiles. And he saw what the radar screen, the radar scope was reading as 5 ICBMs coming from Wyoming. 5. He knew that we would send 1,000 missiles if we were going to launch. And so he questioned the data, which is just so remarkable in its own conception when you think about that. He questioned it, and he didn't send it up the chain of command as a missile attack.
So what was it?
Well, I get into this in the book, which is terrifying. So, okay, let me back up for a second of how good our technology is. So we have a system in space, a satellite system called SBIRS, Space-Based Infrared Satellite System. It's like the Paul Revere of the 21st century. It is parked over our enemies that have nuclear weapons, and it can see and detect a nuclear launch of an ICBM in a fraction of a second, Joe. Confirmed fact. That's why nuclear war begins and ends in 72 minutes, because the SBIRS satellite system sees the launch, and then the U.S. Nuclear Command and Control goes begins. And by the way, an ICBM cannot be redirected, and it cannot be recalled.
What about these hypersonic weapons that can adjust their trajectory? They can move to different places. Like they look like it's going to Arizona and it goes to Chicago.
So ballistic missiles are hypersonic. So a little bit of a misnomer there. And also a hypersonic missile, let's just say it went from Russia to the United States, it might take an hour. A ballistic missile launched from a launch pad outside Moscow takes 26 minutes and 40 seconds to get to Washington, D.C. That number's not going to change. That's gravity. That's physics. That's what it was in 1958, 59, and that's what it is today.
But isn't the new technology that it can alter its course?
Yes, but so if you go with that logic and you say, well, it can move around, so it would be harder to shoot down.
Right.
As I explain in the book, and again, as was relayed to me by defense officials, we can't shoot down ballistic missiles, long-range ballistic missiles, with any kind of certainty or accuracy.
It's not like the Iron Dome or anything like that.
The Iron Dome is almost like terrible for nuclear war, for people to understand how dangerous nuclear war is, because the Iron Dome can shoot down short-range missiles and mid-range missiles. So even the U.S. Aegis systems out on the sea, the Navy systems, shot down some of those Iranian drones. But they can't shoot down ballistic missiles. You want like the 5-minute or the 30-second ballistic missile lesson, because this is what I need. I write for the layman, I think part of the reason why nuclear war is not spoken about in the general public is because it's set up to be intimidating. You'll hear a lot of defense people and analysts using very esoteric language, and it kind of excludes the average Joe or Jane, Joe or Annie. So I ask really basic questions like, how does a ballistic missile work? And it's very simple. That 26 minutes and 40 seconds I told you about. So there's 3 phases of a ballistic missile. It launches, it has boost phase. First 5 minutes, imagine a rocket. You've seen launches. That fire coming out the bottom. That boosts the rocket for 5 minutes. That's when it's detectable from space. Then it enters mid-course phase, which is going to be 20 minutes, arcing across the globe to its target. That is the only place where the interceptor missile can get it, if it can. And it's 500 miles up. And it's traveling at something like Mach 23, 14,000 miles an hour. Okay, so that's 20 minutes. And then the last phase is called terminal phase, appropriately so, 100 seconds, when the warhead, the nuclear warhead, re-enters the atmosphere, boom, explodes over its target. The interceptor system is designed to take out the missile in mid-course phase. So we have 44 interceptors. Remember I told you we have 1,700, let's say, nuclear missiles on ready for launch status. Russia has about the same. We have 44 interceptor missiles. How are 44 interceptor missiles going to go up against more than 1,000 Russian nuclear weapons coming at us? Never mind the fact that each interceptor has a 50% shoot-down rate. And that's by the Missile Defense Agency's spokesperson. So there's this perception that we have a system like the Iron Dome that could take out these incoming missiles, and we simply don't. Which is why when nuclear war begins, it only ends in nuclear Armageddon.
Jesus. Whew. How disturbing was it for you to write this? Just do all this research and to come to these conclusions and realize that we're in a lot worse shape than anybody thinks we are.
I mean, you take when you're reporting or writing, you kind of take your hat off of the emotional or the sentimental part of things where the mother in me, you can't think like that. You just have to tell the story, I believe. I also believe that if I can be as factual and dramatic as possible, then I will have the most readers, which is the point. I am actually not trying to save the world as a journalist. I'm trying to get you to read what I write because I found it super interesting reporting it and learning about it. And also, the whole process for me that I think is the most interesting is going to some of these people who are truly some of the smartest scientists in the world and getting them to explain it in the most basic. Like I say, you have to tell it to me like I'm a kid because I don't have a science mind. And that part is, so that excitement part of it balances out with the terror of it. Because I do also understand why most people don't want to know about this. It's too dreadful. But they also don't want to know because they end up feeling sort of looked down upon, I think, if they ask basic questions like, wait a minute, how does a missile work? Or, like you said, what can't the hypersonics, shouldn't we invest in hypersonics? Well, who really wants to be lectured? And so what I try to do is condense the lectures that I receive about how it all works into this dramatic form, which is how I landed on this format for this book, which I think is really effective, which is giving it to you like a scenario. Like, this is what would happen. And then going back to all my sources. I mean, like, okay, here's an example. We haven't even talked about submarines, but the submarines are completely, you cannot find them in the sea. They are stealth beyond stealth. I interviewed the former commander of the nuclear subforces, a guy called Admiral Connor. Never given an interview like this before. And I said, like, how hard is it to find a nuclear-armed sub? And he said, Annie, it's easier to find a grapefruit-sized object in space than a nuclear sub under the sea.
Jesus.
And these things are, by the way, I have a map in the back of the book that shows you how close our adversaries, enemies, call them what you will, China and Russia, how close they come to the East Coast and the West Coast of the United States regularly, which means it reduces that launch time I told you about of 26 minutes, 40 seconds. That reduces it down to sort of 10 minutes or less.